Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to dive into one of the most disturbing and honestly, deeply misunderstood experiments in scientific history. We're looking at a story that sounds like pure science fiction, but it actually unfolded in real life, right inside a laboratory in Maryland. It's known as the Calhoun effect. So grab a seat because today we are unpacking the dark and fascinating mystery of Universe 25.
Okay, let's just jump right into this bizarre paradox. 8 mice, 5 years, 0 survivors. Think about that for a second. How exactly did a perfectly designed, scientifically engineered utopia result in the complete extinction of every single resident without a single physical disease? Not one single death was caused by anything a vet could have actually diagnosed. To figure out why, we kind of have to go back to the very beginning.
Part 1. A Perfect Paradise, Universe 25. To understand the collapse, we first have to look at the meticulously crafted world built by American ethologist John Calhoun in 1968.
You see, Calhoun spent 2 decades obsessing over one very specific question. What happens to a society when literally nothing is hard anymore? So he built this 25th iteration of his experiments to comfortably support up to 3,800 mice in absolute frictionless luxury. We're talking a 9-foot square enclosure at a federal research lab. It had these walk-up apartments connected by floor-to-ceiling mesh tunnels. There was unlimited food and water from hoppers that never ever ran empty. The cages were hand-cleaned on a strict schedule. The temperature was perfectly stable. I mean, 0 predators and absolutely no diseases. By every physical metric imaginable, it was flawless.
So on day 1, he drops his 8 healthy founders inside. And for a while, it's great. They just explore, settle in. By day 104, the first litters are born, and the population starts doubling every 55 days. But then, right at day 315, the population hits 600, and the breakdown suddenly begins. By day 560, the population peaks at 2,200 mice, which, by the way, is way below that 3,800 capacity. And incredibly, by day 920, the very last successful conception occurs. So, what exactly went wrong in paradise?
Part 2. The behavioral sink. Social space vanishes. As the population multiplied, the physical space stayed exactly the same, but the social space completely disappeared. Now, what's really mind-blowing here is how the abundance of food just didn't matter at all. Calhoun called this the behavioral sink. It's this wild phenomenon where the mice compulsively crowded around just a few specific feeders, while totally empty, fully stocked feeders sitting right nearby were rendered completely useless. The mice literally lost the ability to eat normally without this extreme claustrophobic crowding. The presence of other mice had become so intensely wired into their feeding instinct that a feeder was totally useless to them if they were alone. They simply refused to eat by themselves.
In a normal colony out in the wild, right, surplus mice would just pack up, immigrate, and find new territory. But inside Universe 25, there was nowhere else to go. With no new territory to claim, the surplus males fractured into 2 super disturbing extremes. First, you had the center pool males. These guys were just listless. They gathered in the center of the enclosure in giant pools of bodies, just completely apathetic. They had no jobs, no roles, so they just did nothing. If they got attacked, they wouldn't even fight back. They'd just take it. And then you had the exact opposite, the rogue males. These mice were frantic and completely indiscriminate. They moved incredibly fast, forced themselves into defended nests, and completely bypassed all normal courtship rituals.
This hyperactive chaos completely shattered the maternal dynamics, and the social fabric basically just died. The constant territorial defense absolutely exhausted the dominant males, so they just stopped patrolling altogether, which meant mothers were suddenly forced to defend their nests all by themselves while still trying to nurse. And the result of that intense, unrelenting pressure? Stressed mothers actually turned on their own young. Pups were abandoned, scattered, or just forgotten entirely. And tragically, in the very worst stretches of this, mothers even consumed their own offspring. The females who managed to escape either retreated to the highest apartments to live completely isolated, or they just became violently overwhelmed trying to protect their young without any male support.
Which leads us to this one. Staggering statistic. 1 in 20. In the worst sections of the so-called paradise, fewer than 1 in 20 newborn mice survived to weaning. That's a 5% survival rate. The physical bodies of the adult mice were totally alive and healthy, but the structure that held them together as a functioning species, that was effectively dead.
Part 3. The beautiful ones functionally dead. Out of this horrific, chaotic environment, a small new generation of surviving pups actually did grow up. But they grew up with absolutely zero model of what a functioning mouse society looked like. Calhoun called this eerie, isolated group the beautiful ones. They never fought. They never attempted to mate. Honestly, they avoided all social interaction entirely. Instead, they just obsessively groomed themselves all day long, maintaining completely unblemished, perfect fur. Externally, they looked like the absolute healthiest, most pristine mice in the whole colony, so the name fit perfectly. But internally, socially, they were functionally dead. So why did they become this way? Well, their nervous systems developed in a world where every single social role was already filled by someone else, so they simply opted out of the species. Because there was literally nothing for them to do, no territory to claim, no mates to win, no young to raise, they just ate, slept, and groomed themselves, as if no other mouse even existed in the enclosure with them.
Let's just pause for a second and let the philosophical weight of Calhoun's observation really sink in here. The first was the death of the spirit. The second was the death of the body. The society died long before the last physical mouse passed away in May of 1973. After day 920, no new mice were born at all. They just aged out, beautifully groomed and entirely alone, until the population finally hit zero.
Part 4. The real cause. A misunderstood death. Now, for 50 years, politicians, urbanists, and the general public have used this experiment as a massive metaphor to warn about modern human life. But here's the shocking truth. Almost all of them got the conclusion completely backwards. The public naturally assumed that comfort and abundance kill, that a life with no physical struggle just destroys itself. People thought, oh, free food and lazy luxury ruin the mice. But actually, scratch that. Calhoun's real takeaway was totally different. He found that the disappearance of meaningful roles and purpose is what actually destroys a society. It wasn't the free food. It wasn't the comfy apartments that doomed Universe 25. It was the total evaporation of a reason to even participate in the species.
This quote right here, directly from Calhoun's paper, is the absolute core of our explainer today. He wrote, "If the number of individuals capable of filling meaningful roles greatly exceeds the number of roles available, only violence and disruption can follow." The killer wasn't the comfort, you guys. The killer was a population that grew faster than the supply of meaningful roles the society could actually offer. When the young grew up with literally nothing they were expected to inherit or do, the whole structure just evaporated.
Part 5. Creating meaning, preventing collapse. What gets so often ignored in pop culture is that Calhoun wasn't some kind of doomer. He actually spent the rest of his career trying to figure out how to prevent this exact collapse from happening to humans. Comfort didn't kill the mice. It just removed the friction that made being alive feel like something. Calhoun kept running experiments because he realized something super important. Humans, unlike mice, have the unique ability to choose differently when our physical space contracts. We don't just have to roll over and give up when the map gets full.
And that brings us to this absolutely fascinating concept Calhoun developed. He called it ideational generativity. Now, that's a really big academic phrase for a surprisingly simple idea. It's basically our human ability to extend ourselves into conceptual space, into ideas, into networks, and into the hard work of building entirely new roles that literally didn't exist before. Calhoun believed that our survival as a species depends entirely on this. We have to constantly generate new reasons to be here. New fields, new art, new ways to contribute, even when our basic physical needs are totally handled by society.
Universe 25 shows us that the mice didn't have a choice in their destiny. Once the physical roles ran out, they were just done. But we're not mice. We still have a choice. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought. The mice ran out of meaningful roles. What will you build? What happens next is completely on us.